was a rehearsal.
Welcome everyone. Here we are for the November 2023, oh no, October 2023 edition of Recordando. And for today's theme, we have Recordando los Antepasados. Thank you for being here. My name is Tammy Gomez, and I've been hosting this online or virtual poetry series since November of 2020. So next month will mark, I guess, the third anniversary. So I'm very excited that you have continued to join us here. Those of you who watch or go to the YouTube videos, which are uploaded. These documented videos are uploaded to YouTube when I get to do that. So for tonight, I am very excited to introduce our featured poet, who's been very busy with several new publications. And also, I'd love for you to talk about the anthology you're affiliated with, Pilar. Pilar Rodriguez Aranda hails from Mexico. And I met you, Pilar, in Nuevo Mexico in Santa Fe decades ago.
I
I'm so
know.
excited to still be connected with you. Please share about all of your work and read as you will. And you can, si quieres, leer un poco right now and then come back and read some more later. There might be different people in the room with us that I would love for them to hear your work also. Thank you. Let's welcome Pilar.
Thank you. Well, I know that you invited me first to, I'll just mention because there's not much to read in this book. It's this anthology. It's an anthology of essays that it's a book that we started with Michael Rothenberg. I don't know if you know him. He started the movement 100,000 Poets for Change. And we did a call for entries. We got the essays, but things got delayed a lot because of personal issues with Michael and his family and then his illness. But at some point, he stepped down, and two more people from the movement uh, joined me, and the three of us read all the essays and got the work together. And then I was the one who did the design and the whole editing part with photos. And what we tried to do is kind of tell the story of the movement, but from different voices and different experiences. And so then you have chronicles and you have essays and you have and we worked on we for example discovered that a lot of people talked about, of course, the pandemic. So we had a small subchapter about what we learned from going, like right now, to virtual experience. And so it was a big learning curve for me doing this book, not only from the point of view of an editor, but as a designer, and like I was saying when we were talking before starting the show, is that I started doing and editing my own books because I got really frustrated with a lot of the publishing houses that I work with, because they would either, sometimes they charge you, but then they don't distribute the book, and then you have a bodega full of books. One thing is to write a book, and the other one is to sell it, right? And I learned, of course, that during the last 4 years that I worked with my partner in his bookstore, and learn all the things behind and how the big publishing houses work, and how they're a lot of times losing money. And we think, because they do their money from all the big bestsellers, and that's all they are looking for, no? So, and I stopped feeling guilty about publishing my own work, because a lot of times you're like, oh, I want somebody else to publish me, because otherwise people don't believe you. But at this stage, at this age, it's like, what? I want my work to be out there instead of in a drawer. And maybe when I die, people will start buying the books. Doesn't matter. they'll be there, and my word will be there. And at some point, we will be the ancestors of others, right? So, and also the other thing that's happening in my life before start reading is that I've been for the last 3 years I've been researching one of my great great grandmothers, because I want to write about her life. And so that's taken me totally away from poetry somehow. Um, and so in the last year, I guess I hardly been writing poetry and looking for the best way to approach, a new way of I'm used to writing essays, for example, but I know I was like dealing, do I want to write fiction? Do I write, things like that, new to me. And, but this whole idea of remembering the ancestors, that's why I'm bringing it up, because it was funny how this theme found me so late in my life, but I am totally absorbed by it. And now I'm ready to, because I've been like reading history of Mexico, and my brain is full of all these stories, because it's not only one. You started with your great great grandmother, but then I had to go through her brother, who was a famous one, and her, because he was a governor of Jalisco, and of course they would write about him, not about her. As we know, unless you leave something written, you know I learned that too. And even the brother who was a governor, he was not a writer, so he's been forgotten and censored, because he was a liberal and he was very radical. And so I also feel this responsibility of telling a little about him as well. So anyway, that's where I am right now. And one of the books that deals also with the theme of family. It's a one that got published in an ebook by a publishing house, but they were a very disorganized company. Another disillusionment. They didn't do much for publicizing, and so the contract ended about a few months ago, and I grabbed the book, and I I published it in print, and so that's the one more family. And I basically it's a presentation like this, and it has some photos again, but it's got the Spanish and English, and maybe I can read from that. I don't know if you want to ask me a question from all the things I just said, because I just throw a bunch of things
Well,
before I
yeah, I
read.
mean, I'm loving to hear about all the different influences. Like, I mean, you work in so many different genres with, I mean, I know of the video and poetry, but I know now that you're affiliated with 100,000 Poets for Change, which is an international movement. And Michael Rothenberg, he's known all over the world. I mean, there are people in San Antonio. I know Edward Vidaure, the publisher of Flower Song Press, like he knows Michael Rothenberg. So, there's Michael Rothenberg had a really tight connection with a lot of folks that I didn't even know was there. Victoria Valenzuela in San Antonio also worked with Michael, and they were all grieving and very sad when he passed away. But I had no idea, Pilar, that you were working with him so closely, and then you are in the, you did the design for the book, which also makes me want to.
I was one of the first people who responded to Michael's
Wow.
initial invitation, and so not in a way, I am the founder of the movement in Mexico. For the first years, I was not only organizing my own events, but coordinating many of the Mexican information and sending it to him and translating and doing all kinds of things until I burned out and I kind of stepped back a little bit. But always, I have the connection and the friendship with Michael was uh, always there. So after a while, I just kind of just kept organizing, but not doing as much as I was doing because it's very, I mean, it's absorbing to try to save the world, but it's impossible. So you have to start with yourself.
But yeah, the time it takes to organize and coordinate events. You know, I've been an event producer for decades, and it takes so much effort. If you want a quality event and you want, you know, it's like, you know, publishing the book and then doing distribution and sales. You know, it's like a whole other job to organize and put together events and bring the people in, and then also do the content, you know, the actual program. So this is amazing to hear that you were involved with that movement for so long from the inception, especially in Mexico. So I want to get the dates. Like, when were you working, you know, from the inception to be the Mexico, you know, the national representative for that 100,000 Poets for Change?
Well, like I said, since the very beginning, let's say the first, we had one of the things that's in the book is the original
What was it, the
publication.
1980s or 90s? Like, I don't even
It
know.
was 2000,
Okay.
March 2011 when Terry and Michael published the invitation on Facebook. Um, so the first events were on September that year. And the very first 2 years were very exciting because we didn't have Zoom or anything, but we were streaming, and the whole idea of doing an event all over the world at the same time was so exhilarating, very, very exciting. In Mexico, the first 2 years, we had 1 year we had about 30 events, over 30 cities. I mean, over 31 year. I can't remember the other. So Italy and Mexico were probably the non-US speaking countries that had the most participation in the movement. And also at the beginning, and then something that I wanted to underline in the book was when Michael and Terry first published this, the idea was to bring poetry to the streets, or, to everywhere, but to the level of the street. And so in Mexico, we had people who were putting poems in the cars and doing poetry hangers in bridges, and arriving to a McDonald's, sort of like a McDonald's place, and doing poetry, right, impromptu, things like that, very wild and crazy. And unfortunately, and I don't think there's a reflection on that, but as time goes by, and I guess we all get burned out, and so the events just become events. Now it's kind of sad, because I thought it's just so much easier to just go out in the street and do things there than trying to get a theater and do it. And then because it becomes just another regular poetry event, which you can do any time of the year. For me, it lost that spark, that intention. But on the other hand, we gained brotherhood, sisterhood, like what you were saying. There's so many people who, in some way or another, have read, organized something or other, know about 100,000 Poets for Change, and that's something that was achieved. I think this, even though I think artists always had the sense of brotherhood or sisterhood, but somehow those who were part of the 100,000, especially from the beginning, we had this kind of family feeling, no? And it's a really, really empowering at some point.
I think it's important to know that you're, as a woman and a feminist, that you were involved, at the inception, with this movement. And I will never talk about that project without mentioning your name. And it's important to mention, the females, the women in the house who are doing things also. besides, the one, Michael
Yeah.
Rothenberg gets a lot of
I mean,
the kudos and
I'm
attention.
glad you say this because I mean that was the idea of the book. For one of the ideas for me is to remind people that even though and I love Michael, but you know how people after they die, we tend to sanctify them and
Mm-hmm.
turn them, and Michael was full of defects like all of us. So I'm not gonna talk about. I mean, that's not the point. The point is that all of us were the movement. I mean, what you just said. Michael was, of course, the leader. He put his life on it all the time. I was amazed. He had all that. I mean, he was producing and doing all kinds of things, and then organizing worldwide. Uh, but but we have to remember that without everybody else, in all over the world, because we had people from Egypt and we had people from Morocco and India and Malaysia, South America, and uh, they are not heard a lot, and we have to. So part of that was the idea of the book. So when we didn't get essays from a lot of the organizers from these parts of the world, uh, I started inserting and looking for articles and materials to complement it and to show how strong the movement really had been. No, so that's again the legacy. That's my legacy in terms of the movement now, to honor Michael, but to remind people that we have to keep doing it. We, are part of poetry. I mean, I'm sorry, peace, justice, and sustainability were our goals. So, we have to continue. We haven't achieved much, as Kamala was saying. I mean, right now it's such a difficult time, and it seems like everybody's like traumatized now. It's like we need to do something and shake up. I don't know what. At least in the U.S., I don't see what's gonna change if Americans don't shake things inside their country, because this is just not gonna happen outside.
Yeah,
I mean, it's happening, but you guys you need to do your part.
I get a little frustrated and sometimes even disgusted that we're considered the movers and shakers, that if it doesn't start first in the US, then it isn't going to happen around the world. I get a little, like I said, frustrated, and then also sometimes disgusted. Like, why does it have to be us? Like, we have failed globally on a lot of different levels, and it's on us, but I don't know if we're up for that task anymore. Have we lost our
But
moral
I'm not
compass and
talking
our
about going
credibility?
out in the world, Tammy. I'm talking about changing your government, our government. I mean, I'm a U.S. citizen too, so
No, that's
that's
what
what
I
I'm
mean.
talking about.
También, like, also, like, I just see a lot of apathy, and frankly, right now people are really afraid to speak out, because they become targets for very emboldened factions that may be comprised of very few numbers of people, disproportionately, their numbers are disproportionate to the totality of our population here, but still those
Mhm.
people are weaponized and weaponizing people. And so, there are folks that don't want to speak out, or they don't want to push back, and no one wants to be the first, because they want to feel like somebody's going to be there with you or catch you if you fall. And it's really a really demoralizing place that I feel we are in sometimes when it hits me hard. Right
It's a
now,
very large country. It's a very difficult country, I think, the US. It's humongous, humongous. I mean, right now in Mexico, we've been going through 5 years of the new government that has really changed things. Finally, after two fraudulent elections, he was finally elected. Uh, and of course, it's not like a revolution, and we haven't changed things, but at least corruption has ended and priorities have been straightened up, and money's going where it should be going, at least in most of the places, because again, it's not the same in Guerrero than in Mexico City or Yucatan. I mean, it's the same in the States. I mean, it's not the same in Texas and
Right.
California. I don't know where you are. And I'm not saying you. I mean, I was saying, but I do really believe that even though you might feel disgusted, but I really think that until the U.S. Government changes from within, nothing else is going to change. I don't know about outside of the world. I mean, human beings are going to continue being who. I mean, I don't really have much hope for changing human nature, but I think the majority of people want to live in peace and are doing it, are saying it. It's just what do we do? How do we get these leaders to do something real? Because all they do is simulate. I mean, right now they stopped. They finally. I'm glad to hear that finally the help has come through, but that's
In Gaza.
just
Yeah.
in Gaza. Anyway, so it's just it's part of what it is for us as poets, right? To live, react, and at the end, I guess it's the writing that what we have, whether for healing or for hopefully in sharing. Like you were saying, like you were sharing, you both were sharing
About family.
these healing poems, which are we heal ourselves, but we're hoping that the process will also. I mean, that's how I see sometimes that poetry works sometimes. Anyway, but like this book I was sharing, and maybe I should read some poetry.
Yeah, why not?
It's about really my mother's family. She is the and my grandfather, who was actually the great great grandmother I was mentioning about, was the grandmother of my grandfather. So that line, it's the same line, this family line. And so I'm writing about them, about my uncles and aunts, and because their trauma and their difficult life also affected mine. And as we know, how things.
Generational trauma.
Exactly. So I'll start with this, and I'll read in English. They're my own translations, and it's called Etymologies. We attempt to reinvent ourselves when we don't even know what is hidden in our names, the weight of their anthroponymy, the genetics along them. For instance, I don't remember my first years. I assume those were not happy years. I remember one photo where I'm by myself, laying on a large bed, a few months old, a white and gray image imprinted vaguely in my mind. There is no way to understand what we are if we don't know where we come from. Yet how to understand what has no description, bibliography card, or at the very least an abstract? I grew up sheltered by a fiction. Every day, my mom retold it to me. She was, as always, waiting. But I'm getting ahead, and really, that's a deriving story. Distance is prevention. It's an enforced fabrication, regulation, and punishment. Rigidity in her father's surname, emotion jumble in her mother's. Pain is no friend of memory, and a sentimental halo bathes it all in nostalgia. highly selected memories. Ping pong is this game of remembrance and invention. Its imaginary registry is in the present. That's one. Then another I had. Well, I'll read this one. This is really short that I like. It's called Rosemary for Memory. And it's got a little quote from a Mexican muralist that I had the fortune to meet from Tepito. And he said, when I was born, the truth is I didn't like life. I didn't like being alive. I didn't like being born. So the poem goes, at birth, I first perceived an excessively salubrious smell, sharp, of forced solitude. I didn't want to be born, nor did I immediately like life. I felt repelled by that smell of disinfected emotion, of a spotless and grey inevitability. I knew not of any secrets, nor the deriving stories. I knew not of fear, but smelled it the exact instant I was born. So that was the idea that when I was, my mom was not married. So my grandmother took her to another city outside in Morelia for me to be born. And so, I know that a lot of these things and memories that I write are also part of my imagination because a lot of things were never told to me until later. And by the time they were told to me, they were probably already a story. You know what I mean? Some parts of the reality are never told. And that's what I'm learning also in this book about my great great grandmother. The more I find out, the less I know. The more some stories are like this doesn't really click. There's some mystery here that I'm never gonna find out because nobody wrote the story. So I'm not revealing any, and really not telling any secrets because they're not mine to tell. And at the end of the book, even though it has a sad or feeling of those two poems, it's my process of seeing what would help us, what would help this family heal, and for me is this, to communicate, to share. And unfortunately, my uncles and my aunts never did that, never share their pain, never, three of them already have died. And it's sad to see a family fall apart because it's really what's going on in society,
Yeah.
in terms of. So anyway, so, I don't know.
There was a couple of things that are bubbling up inside of me about that I want to say, but I want to invite others to also comment or ask you questions if anyone has questions or want to get some clarification from Pilar. Pilar, when I received the book, and I'm sorry my copy is disappeared right now. I have so much clutter right now, but I was trying to, and you have it's a bilingual edition. There's the English across from the Spanish, side by side, which I love that presentation, but of the poems. But I was trying to take away, is the feeling a bitterness, a resentment, an anger, or is it a burgeoning, emerging forgiveness and acceptance? Like, you probably had one feeling while you were writing and then another feeling when you were assembling for the book, and maybe tonight a different feeling being here reading. So can you share some of that emotional, if you feel comfortable, yeah, about that, the emotional place that you were in for this process?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't read a lot. I realize I don't read a lot from it because you know, tend to be, I don't know, if bitter, it's too serious sometimes, or I mean, sometimes I think certain poetry is more to read, uh, you know, by yourself than to share or to listen out loud. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I mean, right now it's such a we're very intimate, has an intimate feeling. But in large spaces, sometimes it's hard to read poems like this. You know, I read very short ones or very very few. You know, but yeah, it was like a need to. Maybe because I'm the writer in the family, you know, we feel like you have the responsibility,
Yeah.
you know, of telling the story. And at the same time, I felt it was not my story. You know what I mean? Because even though it's affected me, I was only seeing it. I was not the sister or the brother who grew up with a beating father and a sick mother, which was my grandmother. Um, and so, like I said, my mom was not married when I was born. And you know, eventually my parents married, and whatever that, like I said, it's another story. But and so that touch upon that part of the family, but really it's more of the origins, you know, before I was born. That was my idea, to try to understand and what happened with that. Why did that? And that's what I was mentioning a while ago. I felt that the main problem with everybody in the family was that resentment that you mentioned was it's within them. That like I read a long time ago an article. I still have it somewhere from the UDNE magazine. I don't know if you remember that magazine. It was very good about how families were healing in therapy together. You know, brothers and sisters, because sometimes something very very stupid and silly can generate this resentment and stay forever just because you never cleared it out,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so that was behind me. That was so kind of like, and I, um, when the book came out, only one person in my family came to the presentation. You know, that kind of thing. You know, that tells you a lot. You know, and so. But for me, it was that. It was like, okay, I do my part. What else can I do? I mean, in a you can't, like, again, I mean, my back is already hurting. I can't carry any more weight, you know. So it was, in that sense, was liberating. At first I was, you know, fearful. Not being read by my family, it's liberating in a way. But it was also sad because I thought, well, you know, now I know why Will is they 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 really don't want to know anything about their past. For them, not knowing about the past is their healing way,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know. So, and for me, it's the opposite. For me, it's to understand where we come from, and so there are other terrible stories in the book, but yes, it's like a it's like a process. I feel that the book it's put as a process of how, I'm telling you about this, but then how at the end of the book, or at the end of this process of healing process, this is my conclusions. You know, kind of like the emotional process that you mentioned. You know, put in words. I don't know if that makes sense, but that
Yeah, it
was
does.
that.
When I was holding it, because you sent me a copy, I was holding it and looking through it and reading some of the pieces. I really felt like, oh my gosh, I'm reading like a family treasure, like a family heirloom. You know, like it's something handed down, like an heirloom, but they don't know they're handing it down because it's just memory and stories. It's like it doesn't have a body, it doesn't have material life, but then you made it material life in the book. And when I was holding the book, I also felt a little bit like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't, this is a family thing. I shouldn't have that because it's not my, you know, I don't know. It was momentary because I knew like, well, you
Interesting.
published it. You want me to read it, right? You want us to read it. It's if we want to read it. But it just felt like wow, it's so private. It's like somebody's diaries, angry diaries, bitter diary. And so I almost feel like
I was going to say that the
everybody
prologue that I'm sorry.
I
No,
almost
I'm just
feel that everybody probably should write that book.
I mean, and that's the title, no? One More Family. I mean, I
Yeah.
think a
Yeah.
lot of us have, if not our direct part of the family, some part of some, uh, how do you say, part of the family has things like that. And the woman who wrote the prologue for the book, and it's called Not to Say It Out Loud. It's what you're saying. I mean, I think I wanted to write about the things that nobody writes about, like really taboo things, like incest and, heavy things that even now, I mean, like a while ago, I was talking about Mexico, and I'm it's terrible because I see it more in the news, but I think it's good that they're finally like capturing feminicides and men who are abusing their children, their own daughters or sons, things like that are finally happening, even though they go out because they pay, and the judicial system is rotten. But at least there's an awareness in this is so that is, I think, what was I trying to say. And I think Lucia Melgar, the woman who wrote the prologue, I really love what she wrote, because I think maybe you have to be more in the Mexico City space. It's also very intense to realize that this gets multiplied, and it's surrounding you everywhere. I mean, there's secrets and there's things that we don't want to talk, and we simulate things are well at home, and all the things that are, hopefully changing.
¿Puedes leer uno en español? Can you read one in Spanish for us from that collection?
Sure. Okay. This has, I think I marked it. Here it is. It's got the title of the book, One More Family, Una Familia Más. Se encarna el secreto. Secreta un olor sedoso y turbio, una gangrena oscura y grave. La carne pierde su color. La piel se torna en sueño. Se toca el secreto. Es una adicción a voces, una garganta de múltiples niveles. La textura sabe del dolor, el hueso suena hueco. Se entierra el secreto. No se coloca una cruz ni lápida. Uno olvida el lugar donde quedó. La memoria es un campo minado. La pierna pisa sin prisa, avanza sin saber, explota el secreto. No queda nada más que él. No se reconoce en su deceso. La muerte huele a niñez perdida. El oído ya no escucha. Se monta el secreto. Hecho humo y polvo lo cubre todo. La sangre recorre, se escurre en las calles, la ternura se encostra en cenizas. Se entume el secreto. No siente ni calor ni miedo. El ojo vierte una sequía interminable. La lágrima es cosa de otro mundo. La tristeza es extranjera nacionalizada. Se queda el secreto. I don't know how much he knows the Spanish.
That was beautiful.
Thank you. There's a couple of images there that it reminded me of Gaza. It was weird.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah, to personify the secret and the secret, how it grows and permeates and takes different forms and persists. It's yeah. Wow, that's a really strong one. Thank you. Thank you for reading that one.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, and then the other book that I sent you, it's all in Spanish. I think I might try to publish I don't have all the poems translated in English, and some of them are very complicated. But it's a much funner book. There's a proof that's why I got this line, and it's mostly erotic or free. It was one of my. It was it was the whole opposite of the other. I guess it's more like life and sex and just embracing life in a way. And also, it's a very feminist because I mean, the title you can tell by it's called "Goodbye to God." It's just in Spanish, the play words. And originally, it was going to be called that Magdalena. The, that somebody said it was stronger, suggested the other was stronger. So I try. I don't really. I'm not a person who likes to stay in sadness or any of these. I, I writing has helped me totally in that sense. I mean, I do follow in sadness, depression, like many people, but not luckily not it's not an issue. But I do think that the writing has helped, because when you carry all that from your family, it would be so easy to just fall into that same pattern, you know. Uh, and so rather than confront, evade, and I'm good at that. So it's trying not to evade that much because it's not good. So, anyway.
I found one line in English just now.
Oh yes,
Uh
my besties.
Page 121. I need a fucking painkiller.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
that's a really fun poem. I actually also have a CD. I should at some
oh,
point
it's a recording
mail
of the
you.
of all the same poems?
It's some of the poems from this book are here, but they're like from different. When I was living in Marinalco, which is a town about 2 hours from Mexico City, I lived there from like 2013 to 2016 before I moved to Tijuana. And we did like 3 or 4 presentations with a group of very young musicians. And when I decided to move, I said, you guys, we need to record this because they did original music, and it was, it was great. So we did it. And this line that you mentioned is from a poem that's called Nuestras Luchitas, our struggles, or more like our wrestling. And it was it started as a play in where I wanted to uh, uh, compare. I was in some weird relationship there where it was like a wrestle, like so I thought, okay, let me read more about wrestling. I'm not even into that lucha libre or anything. It's just a national sport, but and I learn all the terms, and I play with them, and but they're like different timings. So that's like the one. It was like, I need a fucking painkiller. It just doesn't sound in Spanish. It doesn't have that. But
Is there one you
so
want to read from that collection? Do you want to read?
sure.
Or if you want to read Luchitas, that would be great. Nuestras
Okay.
Luchitas. It's up
It's
to
a
you.
bit.
Lo que quieres.
I love that poem, you guys. But how is your Spanish? Does it matter to you
What do
guys?
you, Kamala, Jeffrey, Lorraine? I mean, Lorraine and Lorraine, of course, is
Okay. Okay. nuestras luchitas. No son de cómodo cuadrilátero porque han conocido piso y azulejo, años sin festejo y distancias sin convivencia o enfrentamiento. Son de toma y daca, de culpa y arrepentimiento. Nuestras luchitas son confinamiento de la vida y el deseo, careo ante la noche y el derroche, posibilidad de creer y resguardo ante la única de todas las certezas, nuestra muerte. Aventarse a vivir requiere callo y equilibrio de baile, un pinche tango, pasos elegantes, golpes certeros, control esquivo. Necesito afinar mi vocabulario boxístico, mi gramática confrontativa, mis rimas en rounds absolutos. Cuán frágil me he sentido y me digo que es a razón de mis lecturas, pero en realidad han sido nuestras más recientes aventuras, la incertidumbre que siempre surge en estas coyunturas. Temo escuchar un nuevo campanazo, fin del combate o el siguiente asalto. Igual es tu silencio el que me va debilitando. 2. Busco rendirme y una voz, mi coach interior, me asusa, me echa cubos de agua fría, me medio cura las heridas y me dice, esto aún no termina. ¿Eres tú mi contrincante luchando con mi cuerpo por tu vida? La idea es vivir así. La idea de vivir así me exalta, intentando derrotar la muerte, yo con tu cuerpo, tú con el mío. Quisiera lográramos ser uno en instantes de total rendición. Un día tú, un día yo. 3. Quisiera que insistieras y atacaras la tristeza con mi cuerpo, que te deshicieras de todo vestigio de fuerza que quedara en mí, que intentaras someterme. No permitiría que sucediera tan fácilmente. Me resistiría como digna opositora antes de permitir que contaras hasta 3 y te declararas victorioso. Además, que no sería cuestión de una derrota, una pérdida más. Buscaría la revancha una y otra vez si aceptaras el reto. Sobre la lona quedaría cuanto vestigio imaginable, líquidos, pedazos de piel, ruegos, heridas anteriores, desilusiones y traiciones, culpas pisoteadas y sobre todo estorbosos miedos. 4. ¿De qué color es tu máscara? 5. Poder dejarse de hablar y dejarse desear, poder dejarse, poder reencontrarse de nuevo frente a frente, cada uno desde su esquina, mirarse para luego en inhalación profunda desbocarse, saltar en movimiento aéreo irresponsable, aplicar al otro cuanta llave y abrir puertas inimaginables. Claro que para ello hay que entrenar, porque al pancracio no se le puede entrar así nomás. No se puede luchar con resistencia, hay que soltarse en acrobacia y topes suicidas, a ras de lona y asombro dispuesto. Dos cuerpos que se buscan en el otro, haya porras o no, público o no, aplausos o no. Con ironía, pues la sumisión es placer, el placer es rendición y la derrota es todo el triunfo. Me rindo, me rindo, me rindo. Dejarse adolorido. 6. Déjame colocarte las esposas y yo te dejaré lanzarme al golfo. Véndame los ojos y rompen la sensación del tiempo. Haz explotar mi pensamiento. Arrástrame hasta la catapulta y que solo quede hoy. Desespero por apretarte con una llave entre mi suave entrada, que la acrobacia nos encuentre entre la cama y la quebrada, entre lo imposible y la ternura. Prometo no te arrancaré la máscara. Es ilegal, ¿sabes? Detrás de ella, cada quien resguarda su identidad. Con la máscara se generan las expectativas. Pero eso sí, el resto del atuendo va para afuera. Liquidémonos. 7. En nuestras luchitas te permitiría incluso me dieras un golpe bajo, si lo haces amorosamente. ¿Existe esa forma de combate? 8. ¿Y qué tal si las luchitas se tornan en caricias, suaves como la luz de la mañana que se tarda, que se retrasa en un hueco o en una loma alta? ¿Qué tal si al levantarse de la aparente derrota o de la irresistible victoria solo queda una nota etérea como el infinito que se nos antoja ajeno? ¿Qué tal si al rendirnos esa profundidad resulta voz termal y mineral, inacabable fuente, alcanzable muerte? ¿Qué tal si el sometimiento es burla y la lucha es nula? ¿Qué tal si estoy equivocada? No quiero rendirme de antemano. 9. I need a fucking painkiller. 10. En los combates hardcore, las reglas se suprimen. Locura sadística, reglas extremas, la primera sangre o a muerte. Es a morir. Cada encuentro podría ser el último. Pero, ¿acaso no es así la vida siempre? 11. Si nos mantenemos fuera del ring por demasiado tiempo, ambos perderemos por empate imposible. And that's it. Gracias.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh, I love hearing your voice.
Yeah.
Enjoy it. Really enjoy it.
Thank you. I enjoy reading too and sharing. Thank you.
Does anyone else have comments or questions for Pilar? There's so many questions in
Not
your
anything, it could be any of the books, or you don't have to comment on the poems either.
No, that's
Or...
okay. I mean, we often do chit chat about stuff, so I mean that's not unusual for us. I'm just having this feeling that in I don't know if it's a national thing, but I just feel like when I read or hear work from other people in other countries, there is poetry. There are more questions. Questions are included in poems and in poems by US people, US poets. There is less of the questioning, more like asserting, announcing, deliberate stating. Like when you read Neruda's poetry, there's a lot of questions. You know, he's often like, "Oh, I'm not sure about this, and I don't know, and maybe this," and it's like a inquiring mind who allows for things to not be so defined and asking for more information or a definition or a clarification. I just wonder if there's, I mean, maybe Kamala or Lorraine, you might have some insight on that. Like, do you feel like there's a national tendency in the US to like be all knowing and we already got it together and we have no questions? I mean, like, you know, all the questions that were coming across in your work, Pilar, remind me of that. And I think it's a wonderful state to be in, you know, having questions inside of your poems.
I never thought of it before. I just want to say it was sort of a whole sensory experience listening to you. You can hear me, right? because the kitty decided to come sit, and I'm in this sort of hammock chair, and she decided to join me and paw on me. And I don't know if you can see it, but anyway,
Yeah, okay.
I would get a little distracted from her, and then I would be back in the but always hearing the just the experience of the poetry. And I notice, not necessarily in poetry so much, but I use a lot of questions, and sometimes people misunderstand me because I use questions.
How so?
My questions are often sort of rhetorical, or like maybe not necessarily provoking, but I'm not saying, I'm presenting it because I don't want to just walk in and tell people how it is. I want to say, hey, have you thought of this or whatever. And I think a lot of it, and it can lead to people that are more like you're describing, Tammy, deciding to man explain me or whatever. I mean, it isn't always men either, but to think that I don't know. And so, I mean, I still do it, I still raise questions, but sometimes I think that I feel like they're misunderstood afterward. So maybe that is, I don't know. I have to think about that and look for that now.
Well, I think just in the general population, when I'm around the general population here, this whole American macho persona is about asserting and standing strong in conviction, as opposed to leaning in with curiosity to know more and expand understanding, which means asking questions and admitting that one doesn't have the whole picture in mind yet, which I think are really soft and accepting ways to be. And if we want to be a wholesome, healthy people and community and society. So I don't know, it just occurred to me about that, and see if people are responding that way to your questioning, Kamala. I think that just kind of supports my my take. It's like we're not I don't know. We have one way of responding to questions. It's why. Well, why didn't you know? Didn't you know? Or don't you have a PhD? Or like, how can you admit not knowing? Like, I don't know what the attitudes are. I just kind of made that up right now. That little characterization I did. But I just,
it might be more so in Texas too.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah.
North Texas, not anything against. I mean, I'm sure there's pockets everywhere of different kinds of people, but
Yeah.
that's
A lot of your work is it has a lot of allowing, and it's not, to me, it's not like a weakness, or I don't see it as a, a demeaned or a stance of like lack. It's not a lack at all. It's almost like further expansion wanted, further expansion wanted, further expansion wanted. Further, I'm seeking, dot LED lights, seeking, processing, and we all could benefit from that characteristic, right? People in Israel, or like right now, they could benefit from seeking, trying to figure it out.
But maybe, yeah, more philosophy, more questioning, but not of the questioning, but I hear a lot of poetry that I don't even know if it's poetry. I mean, I'm not saying it's not poetic, but a lot of stories. Like I hear a lot of poetry that it's more in the U.S. Um, this is something my partner and I have talked about, and I'm not saying all of the poetry, obviously, but it tends to be a majority of what I hear. Like the metaphorical and this other ways of using language. And maybe that's part of what you're saying. I don't know. It's just like tell a story or give a sermon in a way, in the case of others. Um, uh, but I don't know what it is. I wouldn't know if it happens in Europe, for example. I have no idea if it's a Western uh, uh, thing, or maybe I don't know. But it's interesting. It's interesting to observation. Yeah.
It's a very primary first take that I'm having. Yeah, it feels exciting to me. And if anybody has any thoughts on it to share now or later, I'd welcome that. Thank you. Pilar, great work. Great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to, folks, do you have poems, response poems to share? Lorraine, do you want to read something? And then we can, include Pilar in a conversation some more afterwards.
For Joe. I think they're not here.
Hello, Joe. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tammy. Really appreciate it.
How are you feeling tonight?
Oh, wonderful.
Good.
So happy. Better that I see you.
Appreciate your presence here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Lorraine, you are you there? Are you here? Are you here? I know you're there, but are you here? And Jeffrey, do you have anything else to add?
I don't have a poem. This has been very stimulating, though. That I have been doing a lot of sort of ancestral biography exploration along the same lines, except that there's a whole side of my family where there's no written records. I know who they are, but I have to put it together. It's like my great grandfather on my mother's side grew up in Sweden during a famine, where the famine was so bad that there were reports of cannibalism. And he was born in the midst of the famine and grew up and lived through the famine, and then got married, had my grandfather. And when my grandfather was 1, they decided to come to America. So I know those circumstances, but I have to use my imagination to get in touch with what they must have been feeling. What kind of feelings do you have when you live through a famine where people are eating each other? And then leaving after having lived through that, when things were starting to get a little better, maybe.
Was the famine due to weather conditions, or was it something else like war or political strife?
It was a combination of weather and political stuff. This was like 1870s and 80s. There had been war, but then I'm still researching all of that to find out exactly why there was was all of that. But yeah, it's that plus then bringing it up a number of years ago. I'm the number 2 child out of 7 children, and we're scattered. And I went and visited each of my siblings to talk to them about their memories of my father's death, because my father died the day before his 43rd birthday. And I remember me and what I was doing, but I wanted them to tell their stories. And so I gathered all their stories, and I managed to a year after I talked to my younger brother, he died. And so I had gotten his story about my parents right before that. And I'm still dealing with all of my little brother's death was 13 years ago on the 19th of October. So we just had the going through that memory. So anyway, I have no point to this except that you were raising all of that up and making me realize that I need to put more of this down on paper in some form.
Yeah, there are a lot of blank spots, or kind of maybe worn out memories. They're worn out, like maybe people tried to dust them, or what do you call erase some things. And those are the spots where I feel like those are the fault lines, those are the pressure sores, and maybe those are the things that need to be discussed or excavated, so that we can properly heal as a in my extended family. And as a writer, if people don't tell me the details, I'm going to fill in the blanks. I'm going to make it up. I'm going to invent something to fit in that gap. So related to what you said about the famine in Sweden, that's really piqued my interest. Now I want to maybe look that up, later tonight or tomorrow. I've tried to invent my past history in terms of if anybody here believes in or thinks about what do you call it? Reincarnation? Yeah. I've dabbled with the idea of writing about my possible past life or lives. So I've actually spent some time looking online for historical figures, persons of some notoriety who passed away right before I was born. Thinking, well, maybe their soul was looking for a body to inhabit and they jumped into mine. And it so happens, and I like this idea, but I don't have to cling to the idea, is James Dean, the actor, was he died in a car accident. He was racing, I think. He died shortly before I was born. So I like to think that I am the reincarnated James Dean. I used to entertain that as an idea. And why was it something I was attached to? It's because I liked some of the characteristics of that person or persona, that celebrity, that actor, that face, that rebel without a cause. But then also I was led to look at disasters and horrible accidents and things that happened right before I was born, like in 1961 or so. And I thought, well, maybe I'm reincarnated from somebody that endured great hardship. So I've learned a little bit about the Great Famine in Tibet, I think it was. And I thought, well, I could be a reincarnated person who starved in Tibet. And that's why I have like a belly. Like I'm really invested in eating in this life. So it's a way of amusing myself, A, and B, just having a little mind excursion as to possibility of what preceded me, if I am a soul that gets to take up tenancy in new ways. Um, Also, one more example of things I found out in doing that research. Because I thought about writing a book, and every chapter of this book of microfiction, short prose pieces of my possible past lives. Every chapter would be a different disaster or horrible, heinous thing that happened to a group of people in 1961. I was listening to
Same year.
Yeah, same
I'm
year.
sorry.
Okay.
We're in the same year.
I was hearing a show about how to survive a landslide, like what is it when the snow falls? Is it a landslide? Or is it a different word? When the snow falls down the mountains.
Avalanche.
The avalanche, thank you. How to survive an avalanche, from a guy who teaches people how to survive avalanches. So that was really fascinating. And then he started talking in that radio interview about some famous avalanches in history. And there was one, I want to say, and I don't even remember the country right now. I wrote it down. It's in a file. I think it was in, you're going to have to help me here if you're here, Lorraine. Does Argentina have a coast? I think so.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Pilar. So yeah, there was I think it was in Argentina, there was a landslide an avalanche that was so powerful and so huge, it went from the mountains all the way to the ocean, carrying villages and villages and villages of people with it. And I thought, well, maybe that was my past life. And what kind of invention could I make about that life, that ending, that way of succumbing, at the end of a life. So these are things, yeah, we fill in blanks, and we can do it poetically, with a kind of a fabulous fiction. Fabulous, yeah. Fantasy.
I took a workshop on healing ancestral trauma, and part of it, I mean, these are respected, psychologists who are doing. They have this technique where you sit in a chair with a chair opposite you, and you ask your ancestor to have a seat opposite you, and you have a conversation with them, asking them questions and just seeing what answers come up. And it's a very I've tried it, and you get answers that are surprising from the ancestor that you invite to sit down opposite you and have a conversation with you. So just throw that out there.
I love that. I love that so much.
For me, it was being like somebody talking to me all the time. Don't forget me. Don't forget me. Keep writing, because it's so easy to. But I did have to consider. I mean, I didn't have to. I wanted to consider, well, who I was writing this book for. It was like totally different from writing poetry and just, having emotions go, because I thought, yeah, I could do another poetry book, but I mean, I really hope to have a few more readers and poetry readers, and also because I wanted my daughter to read it, and hopefully my mom will read it. You know what I mean? It's I really wanted to do that because some of them are curious about it, but also in the future again. And so I had that whole idea of what do I do with all the stuff that's not there. And I did start writing a little bit of what I thought would be a fiction, I call historical fiction. But right now, I think I'm going back to my idea of writing more of a narrative, and just because of the process of the research itself was so fascinating, and because history, it's not a static thing there. And some people write something, and then other historians start quoting, and then you find out that it was not true. For example, because their data was wrong to begin with, and they were just quoting somebody who got never bothered to check. From those things to, of course, others where there's just emptiness and there's nothing said, and you have from this date to this date and then nothing in between. So you have all kinds of emptiness and holes to fill in. But I've been fascinated doing it with history, like, for example, supposedly she was in Paris, my great-great-grandmother, in 1860. So I thought, how did she get there? Who did she travel with? There's nothing. I have no idea who she traveled with. She was 18 years old. She must have gone with some uncles, or and so yes, you have to, but then I thought, if I made this up, and then suddenly one in the future they find out that this was, they found the passenger list, and no, that is not true. So I thought, okay, maybe. And so I've been reading other I read this very good biography. It's actually a double biography, and I really enjoyed it. I've been reading a lot of that, but this one in particular I liked a lot. And what she does is that she does fill in those empty, but it's more, it's openly an elucubration of her. Elucubration, is that the word in English? She's telling us, well, I imagine this is what happened, and this is most, and so I thought, I like that a little bit. For me, I feel comfortable, because if I put a lot of fiction there and it sounds really good, but then things might not be quite that, and it will be just one more fiction story. For me, that was how I've been going back to this idea of, no, I want it to be historical, and I also want to ponder about this whole how it is to ask history about things, and also the fact that us women, and that's the main motor of this whole project for me, is that this woman, this great-great-grandmother, she passed on history, not just because she was the sister of the governor, but because she was very beautiful, and supposedly some men killed themselves, they this whole, it's a romantic era. And a very famous writer wrote about her in her diary. So just very few things here and there, but she's like this muse. She's seen from like this woman who inspired, and men die for. And I thought, that's not real. That's a fiction. that's a fiction. So I've been debunking the historians or the chroniclers, because I don't even consider them historians. I'm being very bad, but it's people who write about the history of Guadalajara, and they like to keep their sanctified figures or the romanticized figures, rather than look at the possible reality of who they really were. And so and it's just, and then find out about a life from birth to death. It's humongous. It's huge. So that was another part of trying to see what do I tell? Well, that. But anyway, it's I think a lot of helps if you decide who you want to write a story for, and then you can. It's a different what process from the creative writing, where you just. I love your idea of having this this ancestors, or past lives, like you
Past
said.
lives, yeah.
And it's very ludic, very playful.
Yeah, it's kind of ludicrous actually, but I'm here for that as well.
Not ludicrous, but the ludic.
Right.
Yeah.
But it also illuminates histories that people may not know of, some tragedies and things that happened the year or so before I was born, like things are always happening around the world that we may not keep track of or know of. By the way, Kamala looked up, heard James Dean, and it looks like Richie Valens died just a few days, 3 days before she was born. So maybe Richie Valens lives in your body, Kamala. Or Buddy Holly, for that matter, if he died in the same plane crash. By the way, this is fact, and my mom's just recently shared this, but it started coming out when when Jerry Lee Lewis died, the piano player, from the 50s. And people are having trouble like honoring him, admiring him, because apparently he was in a relationship with his 13-year-old cousin or something like that. So my mom was hearing that on the radio, like we were all hearing it on the radio or TV, and she said, well, when I started dating your dad, going out with him, I was 16 and he was like 23 or 21. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. And then it turns out that was her first concert to go see, or the first date she had with my dad was at a Stanford High School in Stanford, Texas, in the gym, and it was a concert with Buddy Holly. Her first date. I think she said it was Buddy Holly and Jerry Lee Lewis, something like that. But Buddy Holly for sure. And I'm like, wow, like that's a legendary musician, and that was your first date with my dad, and there was a very wide age difference, and it was in a high school gymnasium in Texas that you saw this legend. I mean, like there's so many layers of like like that makes it so fascinating. And lately I've been thinking to create some kind of a performance script, or it could be a film script. I don't want to produce it, I'd like to write it, that shows the Chicano Latino 1950s sock hop communities of West Texas, which my parents were a part of, because they were Chicanos. Of course, they knew Spanish and they loved some of the Spanish language music, norteño, and whatever was out there. But they also loved rock and roll. And my mom wore the dresses, the puffy dresses, and the all the clothes that we see, that people wore historically in that time period in the US. But there were brown skinned people also doing that and loving that part of culture, pop culture. And that story hasn't been written at all. Like I've not seen that story.
Oh, so there's so many stories. I'm sorry, there's so many stories.
Yes, agreed, 100%.
I'm sorry, Kamala, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, and maybe it's more this, I think starting in the 50s, the West Side sound has been in recent years written about more and talked about and played. And I think that was a continuum and a sort of interesting mix of different music.
Now the West Side sound is particular to the West Side of San Antonio, and it encompasses Mexican American youth in putting bands together. I'm trying to remember what I know.
And it was black, brown, and white, I think, somewhat. And even my neighbor, he was a little later. He's about 70 now, I think. So, but he he still plays a little bit of rock and roll kind of sound, but he knew a lot of these people too. But I heard it about, I heard the stories from him as a musician and from a few other people that I ran into, and now I'm starting to hear it on public radio, of some of the bigger name people, I guess, that made the records and stuff. But it is, just listen for it. I can't remember the name of the book. That there's a sort of book that got people started looking back at this and telling the stories. So sort of a distinctive mix of, I think.
One of the things I found out that I had no idea is that the period my great grandmother was born in 1843, great grandmother, and lived through 1919. And in the 60s, when the Civil War in the US was ending, and we also had our own Civil War, and then the French invaded Mexico. And I had no idea that there had been a lot of Mexican exiles living in San Francisco and New York at that time. So that was and then it just reminded me, because then of course I had to read about all that, and there were all agents trying to get money and arms to Mexico, but then there were the Californios and the what we can call the Mexican Americans or Chicanos, and that were also and Americans and helping the Mexicans. So you mentioned parts of history. It's just incredible, and one could just focus on that time. It's what's amazing, I think, for us as writers, that you could focus on just, for example, in the story of your father, Jeffrey, and that origin in so much there, not even get to you or your brothers. And that's the thing, that part for me that's more daunting. I think it's a bit because I'm a bit on this side. I have trouble sometimes taking decisions on what's the best, and just of course once I take it out, I'll stick it to it, even if it takes me 10 years to finish. I don't care, but that's been for me the hardest part, is what to choose, and from what point. It's hard to let go of so much there, to find the little gems, and like you're saying, what you want to say. It's a daunting for me, as in terms of biography.
I'm gonna do something I don't do often, and that's talk about something I'm working on that's not published. So it's my idea, so I'm sharing it. Here it is. But it brings in 3 different things, and only if anybody asked me to explain the background of this story would you know.
Tammy?
Yes.
Me. Remember, you're recording this.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm cool. I'm gonna be pretty vague. So thank you, Lorraine. Appreciate you saying that. So okay, one of my things that I thought I could do, and that seemed about 10 years ago I seemed really interested in starting this, was a writer's residency for immigrants in the US, because I was living in a big house and I had a big extra room, and I thought, I could just very informally start this, and I could find somebody who is a writer and needs a place to live, and it could be like a kind of a DIY artist residency or writer's residency, and I could probably get some funding or get people to contribute funding, friends to help support that, to allow a person with need to do that. So that was one thing, one aspect. And then I started thinking about, of course, because I'm a Libra, and I think about just I'm into justice and fairness and equity, etc. about the fact of being an older woman, and like if a younger person was living in my home, and what, you know, if it might be awkward or whatever, especially if they were male. And so then I started thinking about two other things, which was how there seems to be a tradition, let's say a tradition of older single women going to Nepal and finding young men to marry, and making promises to them to take care of them and helping them get US citizenship and finding that mate there. So I befriended a Nepali guy who was a tour guide, and we spent maybe 2 or 3 hours one day walking around and just having coffee. And I had met him through the touring company I had asked for help from. And he was very sweet, but he had a lot of questions for me because he was about to go to the US with an older woman who was going to marry him. So he had questions for me, like, was he doing the right thing? Was it a good idea? And it makes me think about, you know, like that kind of, you know, is that love? Is it kind of, you know, exploitation based on physical attraction or something else? I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to name all the stuff, but you know where I'm heading with this, you know, that it's about unequal power, possibly. Okay, and the third aspect of it was I had a partner long ago, and he had told me that he was working, he had a temporary job doing some gardening work for someone outside of Austin. And he told me, you know, it was fine at first, but then the lady who hired him was putting him in awkward situations by inviting him to take off his shirt and asking if he would like her to rub his shoulders. So, okay, so all of these things kind of got meshed into the story that I have a draft of it that takes place in an artist residency in a older female's home. And see, it addresses all these things, to, you know, two real things that happened with the fantasy of creating a really legit, proper artist residency for immigrants. And yeah, it's fiction. So I guess we're on a theme that's kind of evolved of like how we fill in the blanks or address some of our stories and histories, and how much of it is fiction and some of it is based on hearsay or things you Google, or what comes out when you interview your siblings. And I just have to roll back to that line from one of your poems you read, Pilar. I grew up sheltered by a fiction.
But if you're going to start a residency for real for immigrants, I don't know, consider if you really want to publish that first. The story.
Could be that's a really good point. Really good point.
I'm sorry, but this is the world now, you know, too.
Yeah. And then there's the essay or poem that has to happen about all the things you held back from doing because you had written about them, and that spoiled the project.
Well, that's another thing about writing. You can live things that are never going to happen. You know? Just
True.
your desires, you know, your dreams, your fantasies. It's another part of it.
Yeah,
and I really think, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say that I think we can't get away from fiction because even in our memories, I mean, our memories are already remade. Even as honest as we try to, you know, at the moment I don't know, I really believe that.
Well, and there's always the I mean, fiction often expresses truth almost better than what actually happened.
That's true. Or what we think happened, because at the
Yeah.
end, again, we will never know. So yeah, I don't. I mean, that mesh that you're saying, I think it's of course some things will have more fantasy and others have more uh, fact. But what you just said now about the truth, that's not going to depend on that, but on our writing, on our capacity to say, or things that we think will touch others, as they have touched us, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just feeling more and more convinced that when we write, when we've written something, we've packed in a whole lot into that work that addresses our own lived experience and also things happening in our contemporaneous environment. Because we're marked by what's going on in Gaza. We're marked by it. Even if you don't think you're being marked by it, you're marked by it. You're it's in your soma, it's in your body, it's in your language. We're learning new terminologies, possibly because of things we're hearing in the news reports. So sometimes, those things we're marked by are going to show up in future poems, or in poems. You might write a love poem tomorrow that's going to be marked by what's going on in the Middle East, or marked by things we've said right now, marked by thoughts about reincarnation, everything.
I also, I don't know if there's a term for that, but I believe in, I don't, yeah, I guess it's belief in genetic memory. We contain these experiences that even to be more realistic than past lives. To the point where our mothers, to that point in time, whatever she was carrying, her memory, even in her unconscious memory, her the memory that stays in the body, that kind of thing. But all the experiences, I mean, like animals do know how to hunt, right? What we call instinct, and in a way, it's a genetic memory, right? So I think some of the memories of my great grandmother are inside me. I mean, they have to be, even if it's a tiny bit, because when we have all these ancestors living in there, and little pieces of them. So we just have to amplify those voices sometimes, I think.
Oh yeah, we haven't even touched on dreams and dream life, which is all, I believe, it's about lives lived before, or genetic memory being expressed through those dreams. Well, we're at 10:22 my time, and I'm going to stop the recording and try to respect people's time. And if y'all want to leave and go do other things for the rest of your evening, this has been a really awesome and utter delight. Pilar, it's been so wonderful to hear your work and your voice.
Thank you.
So, I mean, we can stay and chat a little bit if y'all want to do that, but I'm going to officially say, okay, this is the end of this session of Recordando October 2023. I might have to adjust the date for November, because I realized I'm doing a performance on the third Saturday of November in Dallas. So I think I'm going to have to move it to a different Saturday, something like that. But thank you for sticking with this, and I appreciate everybody.
Thank you, Kamala, for staying.
It's always, eventually we get to the place where there's just great conversation and wonderful ideas being exchanged, and everybody's voice is welcome here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tammy, for planning this, and Pilar, un gran gusto.